Hi there, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to start making our second game. We are going to be making a 3D puzzle for our second game. And in the previous video, we jumped into code right away. So for this video, we're going to step back and we're going to create our first level. So first, let's remove the cube and the sphere that we made in the previous video. So we can start with a fresh scene. And now let's start adding our assets. The first asset that we're going to create is a player. And we'll use a capsule for our player. Let's keep our game object organized and named. So we'll rename the capsule to player. And that's basically how you create a game object. Now in Unity, if you want to reuse this game object in another scenes, what you can do is make this game object a prefab. You can go into any scene and copy the object from there and paste it into another scene. But the benefit of having a prefab, you can modify the options in the inspector, and those options will update to all of the game objects that use that prefab. To create a prefab, all you do is drag the game object that we created to our assets folder. And when we drop there, that game object becomes a prefab. And in our hierarchy, we can see when the game object is a prefab. The icon changes to blue. The next object that we're going to add is going to be our cube. And the cube is going to be something that a player will be moving. And we'll create that as a prefab. Then we'll need a ground. So we'll use a plane for ground. Let's rename our plane to ground. And we'll make a prefab out of it. Another cube for our wall. And the last object will be a plane. And this plane is going to be the target of where we want the cube to go. And we'll also make a prefab. So as you can see, we already have 5 prefabs. So it'd be smart to create a folder. So we'll create a folder, call it prefab. And now we can place all of our prefabs in that folder. There we go. Now that we created all of our assets, we're ready to start placing them in our scene. Before we do that, let's go through some shortcuts and ways you can move around in your scene. So to rotate your view in the scene, you can hold down Alt and use the mouse to drag around. To move around in your scene, you can use Control Alt and use the mouse to drag around. And then if you need zoom, you can use the scroll on your mouse. Now, if you need to focus on any of the objects in your scene, you can always select the object and click F on your keyboard, and that will focus your view on that object. And when you rotate, it's going to be rotating around that object. So that's just some quick tips of how to control the view. And the next tips are about the tools. So in Unity, we have the tools right here at the top. So there's the hand tool, the move tool, rotate tool, scale, and then we have the rectangular tool and the multi-tool, which has the rotate, scale, and move tool in them. You can use these icons to switch to any tool, but there are shortcuts that you can use, and they start from Q for the hand, and then we have W, E, R, T, and Y for those tools. You can use those keys to switch between tools faster. So knowing that, let's start building out our level. First level is going to be straightforward, nothing too complicated. We'll stretch our ground in the x-axis, and then for our target, we actually want to make it smaller, just a little bit bigger than a cube, about that. We can always change it later on, but for now, let's just put a rough positioning of all our objects. So put the player here, the cube, bring it up somewhere here, and now we can build out our wall. And the wall is just going to surround that area. To duplicate any of the objects, you can use Control D on your keyboard, and that creates a duplicate, and it selects the duplicate right away. So we can use the duplicate and move it, and then we can create another duplicate, switch to Rotate tool, or you can go to the Transform and set the degree that you're looking for there. Let's move it back here, scale it down. Something like that. Duplicate the wall and put it on the other side. So that's the rough layout of our first level. We can disable the scene light by using this icon right here to get the image without the light. And as you can see, everything is blending together, and that's not what we want to have. So the next step we're going to do is change the colors of those objects. And in Unity, you can set colors for objects by using materials. And you can create a material by right-clicking on the assets folder and go to create, and we have the material option here. So let's start with our player material. We'll name it player material, and then we can set the color for our player to be bluish. And to change the color of our player, we can drag this material and place it on our player, and that will change the color of our player. So we can repeat the same process for the other objects. So we'll do that quickly right now. So since our wall is a prefab, we can set the color to one of them. And then in our inspector, we can go to override and select mesh renderer. And in here we can click apply and apply prefab wall. And you can see that that change that we did to that wall just applied to the other walls too. One thing that we can see right away is that our target is underneath a little bit. We can move it up slightly. And we can save those changes to our prefabs, and we can use the same approach, override, and it's fine if we keep the transform, so we can just use apply to all for these objects. Now if we go to prefab, you can see that the colors are applied to the prefab now. And let's create a material folder for our materials, and let's place them in there. Now we can preview how the game looks in our play mode. So let's select our camera and go to our game, and we can't see what's on the path. So let's rotate our camera, and we'll also need to pick it up in the Y. There we go. We can make our ground a little bit bigger. And now you can go and fine tune all the positioning and rotations of all of the objects that were placed here. But to keep the video short, we're not going to do this in this video. The last thing that we're going to do in this video is use our move script from the previous video to get our player to move and to move the cube. For that, we need to set our cube to be a dynamic object, and we can do that by adding a component called the rigid body. And when you add the rigid body, this object becomes a dynamic object. So if we place it up higher, click play, we can see that the cube drops down. And now let's go to our player and add our move script to the player. And we'll set the speed to 4 and also add a rigid body to it. Click play. And when the player collides with the cube, you can see that it has a hard time moving it, and the player falls down and starts behaving weird. And so that our player won't fall down, we can switch the rigid body for our player to is kinematic, and that's just going to force movement only forward. And if we click play now, you can see it moves the cube, but the cube rotates and flies out. So we can go to the cube rigid body, and there's an option for constraints, and we can freeze rotation in all of the axes. So let's try that out. And there you go, the player moves the cube towards the target. Of course, the target stops the cube from moving forward, and we'll work on that in the next video. I hope you guys found this video useful. If you liked the video, click on the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.